Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Craig, and I believe that Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. Now, you probably already knew that since I'm doing a talk in a Christian church. But the talk I hope to give over the next few minutes, I hope will present the resurrection in a new and interesting way to you, in a way maybe that's a little bit different from anything you've heard in the past. You see, many people who talk about the resurrection, both believers and unbelievers, spend most of their time debating about whether or not these things actually happened in history. We've already watched a short video which overviews some of the evidence we can give for the resurrection. But if you're not a Christian, it seems likely that this evidence isn't enough for you. You might find it interesting, or you might find it unconvincing. You might want to look more into it, or you might think that looking into it is just a waste of time. But behind these attitudes, there is a question that I'm willing to bet you probably ask yourselves before you came even to a meeting like this. The question is this: why would it matter if Jesus did rise again from the dead? Or to put it another way, what on earth would Jesus' resurrection make a difference in my own life? Why on earth? Sorry. This event happened so long ago. Even if it was true, it happened so long ago, so far away from our own lives that many people probably think it's completely irrelevant. So if you find yourself thinking something like this before you came here, I want to invite you to do something with me for the next 20 minutes or so. During the time that we have together, I want to explore the resurrection by taking you on a sort of sightseeing tour. I want to invite you to take whatever ideas you have about the resurrection and put them in pause for the next few minutes. Take them out of your head and maybe put them in your back pocket for the rest of my talk. And allow me to take you on a tour of a world where the resurrection story really did happen. I want to take you on this tour because I think that you'll find out why we as Christians believe it to be such an appealing idea. You see, we don't just believe the resurrection happened because of historical evidence. We do think there is good historical evidence for the resurrection, and we would be happy to talk about that to you. But that's not actually the most important thing to us. Instead, we believe that the resurrection because it changes how we see the entire world. It changes how we see things in the past, things in our lives now, and things in the future. It changes our view of everything from life to death, hope and sorrow, suffering and glory. And that's why I want to take you on this little tour. Because as we travel through a world where the resurrection really did happen, I hope that you will appreciate a little bit more why we think that this event changed the fabric of reality forever. So if you're willing to come with me on this little experiment, and I'm not really giving you much of a choice, put those ideas that you had into your back pocket, and let's set off together into a world where the resurrection really happened. Now, as I take you on this journey, I'm going to present you with 3 different scenes. And in each of these scenes, an aspect of this world where the resurrection really happened is going to be explored. And as we work through them, I hope you'll see why we think the resurrection matters for us today as well. The first scene I want to explore, I've called the death of light. As we make our way into this scene, we see the light all around us begin to fade away. Just imagine it with me. It fades away until we're left in almost complete darkness. As we look around us, we can see the hazy outlines of crumbling buildings and empty streets. There's no sign of life anywhere at the moment. We see in the windows of one of the buildings a dirty old neon sign, and it broadcasts the words, "All roads lead here." Through the darkness, we can hear the toll of a funeral bell ringing, cutting through the cold night air, reminding visitors to this street that their time is short, that they will not be here for long, that they are fragile, and that their greatest achievements will soon fade out of memory forever. Further up the street, we see a single cloaked figure standing, and he's calling out into the night air. Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's the first scene that I want to take you on. 2, the death of light. But why have I brought you to this street? Why have I presented a scene like this to begin our tour of a world where the resurrection really happened? Well, to me, this scene reminds us that our world is one in which light always dies. This is true when we zoom out to look at the entire universe. If you talk to a scientist about the future, they will tell you that everything around us will eventually become darkness. Our universe in billions of years will all descend into chaos and nothingness. And this threat might seem far off and too distant in the future to really affect our personal lives, but it's not just in the future that light dies. This reality touches our lives here today as well. Many of us in this room endure suffering daily. And even if you're not suffering now, all of us will suffer at one time or another in our lives. And it's not just the suffering that all of us will endure, but the light will die and our lives will come to an end as well. Recently, I became a dad for the first time. And as I've looked into the eyes of my young daughter, Eliana, I have often thought to myself about the joy of bringing a little girl into this world. She's full of life, potential, and vitality. And I intend to protect her with my life and to keep her from danger so that she might live a long and prosperous life. But I've also had the realization as I look into her eyes that even if I am successful in this desire that I have to protect her and to keep her from danger, that little girl will one day grow up and become a woman. And that woman will, long after I have left this world, grow old herself. And she will eventually die. And you might find that to be a morbid thought, one that I would be better off not thinking about as a dad. But I don't think you're right. Even if we don't say something like this out loud, it remains true. In our world, all of the light that we see, the beauty and the life is heading towards darkness. All life is moving towards death, all order to chaos, all beauty to oblivion. And this cold truth needs to be thought about. This truth has been known. We're not the first to think about it. It's been reflected upon for as long as humanity has been thinking about anything. And we might try to hide from it. But passages like the one that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes show us that people who lived long ago, long before us, knew that we must think about our lives in the present in light of our future or our death in the future. Just listen to the words of King Solomon thousands of years ago. Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all of their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations of people come and generations of people go, but the earth remains. No one remembers those former generations, and even those who to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Do you hear the bleakness in those words? The helplessness in those words? Does the death of the universe and your own death fill you with dread? Do you feel in yourself that this cannot be right? That everything that you have worked towards and everything that you are allowed, that you are, cannot be allowed to be meaningless? Do you feel that we cannot allow this to be our end? I think you'll agree with me. We do not want the light to die. We do not want those that we love to die. We do not want to die. Dylan Thomas, a Welsh poet, wrote a poem which expresses this idea as he watched his father dying. And I think his words resonate with all of those who have watched loved ones die. He speaks to his father in the poem and urges him to rage against the dying of the light. He says, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." This poem reminds us that we do not think it is natural for death to take those that we love, that we don't think it's right for the light in our lives to go out forever. But even as we agree with the sentiment behind a poem like this, what can we do? What can be done to break the power of death and to stop all things becoming nothing? How can we rage against the dying of the light? Isn't it too strong for us? Isn't its power unbreakable? Well, to try and answer that, I want to invite you to come and observe a second scene. This scene I've called A Whisper of Dawn. And in it, we seek some of the answers to these questions that we've been asking. Imagine with me again, as we make our way into this scene, that we see it's an early Sunday morning. The sky is still dark as the figure of a woman comes into our view. We can see that there is trauma in this woman's eyes. The events of the 36 hours before this have gripped her deeply as she moves around. We can hear her muttering to herself, "He's dead. The light has gone out." You see, over the last 20 months or so, this person that she is mourning right now brought her hope and the promise of a new and bright day. He spoke of peace and of grace, of love and of mercy, of authority and with conviction. And he promised those that were near to him, those who came and followed him, he promised them that they were going to be a part of an eternal kingdom, God's eternal kingdom. He said that he was going to bring life and freedom to those who were dead and enslaved, and that his life would never die, and that his life would never go out. But then 3 days ago, he had died. And with him, hope had died. And as hope had died, the life had went out of her life. We watch her as she puts together a small bunch of sweet-smelling flowers and spices and puts them in a little jar. And as she fumbles around in the candlelight, looking for her sandals, the darkness is so intense that the little flame of her candle cannot hope to compete with it. She can hardly see. We watch as she makes her way along the path, stumbling and weeping, confused and disorientated. She is met by some companions, and we hear one of them say to her, "Who's going to roll away the stone for us?" These words cause her to shrink even more. We can see that they fill her with hopelessness. Is even this kind act that she intends to do going to come to nothing? We see her as she arrives at the tomb. She knows that he is lying in that stone cavern beyond her. He is dead. He's not breathing. He's lifeless. Her head is bowed. The darkness of the night holds sway around her. The light has gone out. And then suddenly, into that scene, everything changes. A flurry of activity flashed before our eyes. She looks up as someone shouts, "The stone has been rolled away. His body is gone." Some people are running back and forward all of a sudden, telling other people that he's missing. Where is he? Two men appear at the tomb, Peter and John, and then they're gone again. The other women who were there are coming and going. We watch as she leaves the tomb weeping. And then we see her turn. She comes back again. She's on her own. She wants to prove to herself that she wasn't dreaming, to prove he is really gone. As she makes her way to the tomb, we notice on the horizon that a little light has begun to spill over the hills. It's not so dark anymore, but she doesn't seem to notice as she gropes around with her head to the ground. And then we see in that murky twilight of the morning a figure begin walking towards her. He speaks to her in the silence and asks her, "Why are you weeping?" We see her disbelief. "How could I not be weeping?" He asks her who she's looking for, and she says, "Are you a gardener? Where's his body? Why did you allow them to steal it? Where have they taken him?" And then through that silent darkness, we hear a single word spoken loudly and clearly. And everything about this scene and everything about history changes. "Mary," we hear him say. "Mary." And we see her spin around to look at this man more closely. And at the same moment, light begins to spill over the horizon. The sun is coming up. A realization floods her mind. Jesus had been dead, but now Jesus is alive, standing before her. Hope was gone, but the possibility of hope stands before her. The darkness had won, but the light is blazing over the horizon before her very eyes. As we observe these moments, and as the scene shifts and fast forwards through the years ahead, we see Mary and Peter and James and John and hundreds of others come to realize that into a world that had been dominated by darkness and death, a single event had now changed everything. As Christians, we agree with them that this event, the reality of what happened in that scene, changed history forever. Because of this event, we have hope that the light will not go out forever. As Jesus walked out of that tomb, there dawned upon this world a new possibility, a new world in which death was no longer the end, that life could be achieved again through resurrection. And the Apostle Paul explains why we believe this. He tells us that Jesus died to deal with our sins, to deal with the consequences of the things that we did through our human weakness and the things that we have done out of abject rebellion to God. He tells us that Jesus was buried, and after Jesus was buried, he was raised from the dead. And as we ask the question, why does that matter to me? What use is the resurrection of one man 2,000 years ago? We hear Paul answer us and speak back to us. It matters because Jesus was the first of a great harvest of all those who have died. You see, as we come to the end of this second scene and prepare to move into the third one, Paul gives us an explanation to why Christians believe the resurrection is so key. Paul tells us Jesus Christ was raised, and not only that he was raised, but that he was the first one to be raised. Do you see what that means? If he was the first one to be raised, then there are others who will be raised after him into a world of darkness, hopelessness, and death. There shines through history a single pinprick of light that cannot be put out. And that single pinprick of light changes the future for all of us. Jesus' resurrection is a promise that one day others will be raised to life again. It is the promise that there is hope and that death need not be the end of our stories. And so let me just present you with this third and final scene, a scene that we see before us called an endless day. But as we enter this scene, we see that it has become dark again. We're now standing above the earth and looking down at what has been happening through all of history. We see around the world images of pain, suffering, and destruction. We see humans fighting with other humans. We see the heartache of those who have lost loved ones. We see wars and famines and sickness. We see a scene that looks very like that first scene, the death of light. But then into the midst of that scene, we see coming into focus a graveyard. And in that graveyard, a tombstone. And on that tombstone, we see your name. The stone is old and weathered. The name is barely legible. It's about to fade out. The last memory of our life is about to pass from this world. No one will remember what you did, where you were. As you stand there, the words of Solomon hang in the air. Meaningless. Meaningless. Is all of this meaningless? It's too late now to rage against the dying of the light. You're dead. Hope is gone. Darkness has won. Or has it? Has it? Can it be? Once again, this scene changes, and we find ourselves experiencing what Mary experienced all those years ago. We see through the gloom and darkness a whisper of dawn as the figure of a man pierces through the darkness. He approaches the earth, and as he comes, we see the gloom and the chaos melting away from around him. With a word, he stills it. With tears in his eyes, he comforts those who are weeping. As he comes, he establishes peace. He demonstrates grace. He shows love. He is merciful. He speaks with authority. His words change things. And as he comes, you remember that he promised that those who were near him, those who followed him, were going to be a part of an eternal kingdom, of God's eternal kingdom. And you see him establishing that kingdom. You remember that he said he was going to bring life and freedom to those who were dead and enslaved, and that his life would not die, and that his light would not go out. And then you see him walking towards the graveyard, and you hear him speaking. You listen to what he says. Through the darkness, you hear your name. My child, he says, my child, come out. And once again, the scene changes. You find you are no longer watching from the outside. You're aware that something is happening to you. You listen with ears and hear the beating of a heart. You smell with a nose the fresh aroma that fills your lungs. You feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You taste sweetness on a new tongue. You sense light outside of your closed eyes. And so you open your eyes. And as they adapt to the sunlight, you see before you the figure of a man who you are meeting for the first time. A man that you have known your whole life, even though you have never met him. My child, he says, my child, come to me. Look, I am making all things new. And so you look around and you find a world that isn't like the world that you used to live in. And yet it is like that world. It is the same world, but it's not like that world anymore. You feel the change in yourself and in the world. You were dead, but now you're alive. And you know this world cannot have death in it anymore. You were hopeless, but now you have hope. You know there is no more hopelessness in this world. You were in the darkness, but now you see light that can never be put out. You have been raised from the dead, and resurrection life runs forever in your veins. Now, I don't know what you're thinking about what I've just said right now, as I've gone through these three scenes. You might think that I am crazy, that I've lost my mind. But listen to me for just a moment more. These scenes that I have presented you are intended to let you see a world, a glimpse into a world where the resurrection really happened. And we who are Christians believe these things are true. Now, we don't think they're going to happen exactly as I've described them. I've just tried to help us to see a little bit as we see these. But we believe that without the resurrection, all light will die. But we believe because of Jesus' resurrection, the fabric of reality has been changed forever. Into the world of hopelessness, God has made a promise that those who follow Jesus will follow him out of the grave. And so we believe that one day in the future, long after we have died, long after everyone has forgotten our names, Jesus will return and he will raise us from the dead. Our future will not end when the last memory of our name fades from this earth. No, our name is written forever in God's book. And he promises that even if we die, he will not forget us. He will raise us from the dead, and we will live forever with him in a world that has been changed, a world filled with life, with peace, with light, with love, with endless joy. I told you at the beginning that I wanted to take you on this tour because I hoped that it would help you to see why Christians who believe in the resurrection find it to be such an appealing idea. I hope you've seen why we don't just believe in the resurrection because of some historical evidence. We believe in the resurrection because it changes how we see the entire world. It changes how we see the past, see the present, see our future. It changes our view of life and death, of hope and sorrow, of suffering and of glory. The resurrection changes everything. And we believe that we do not have to just imagine a world in which these things happen. We believe that the world that I've described is this world, that these things are true now, and that you can be a part of this future as well. Now, as I finish up, we're going to listen through 3 poems. And in these 3 poems, you will notice that they progress through the same 3 sort of scenes that I have presented. I hope that they help you to see a little bit more what I've been talking about this evening, to see a little bit more clearly the things that I have already been saying. As the 3 readers come up, they'll introduce who the poems are by, and you'll see up on the left of the screen an explanation of which part of my talk that they go along with. And then once they're over, we'll move into the next part of the evening. Thank you for listening.
Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
So this is Easter Dawn by Malcolm Gout. He blesses every love that weeps and grieves, and now he blesses hers who stood and wept, and would not be consoled or leave her love's last touching place, but watched as low light crept up from the east. A sound behind her stirs, a scatter of bright birdsong through the air. She turns but cannot focus through her tears, or recognize the gardener standing there. She hardly hears his gentle question, why? Why are you weeping? Or sees the play of light, but brightens as she chokes out her reply. They took my love away, my day is night. And then she hears her name, she hears love say, the word that turns her night and ours today.
I'm reading To Christ Who Conquers Death by Doug McKelvey. Christ's heel is planted on death's neck. Death cannot breathe. And this space in which we grieve is but the long exhale of death's last expiring breath. This age of passing sorrows is but the long death rattle of death itself. The outcome bears no hint of doubt. The work is done. The victory is won. So death will be undone. All works of death will be undone. The victory is yours, O King. Now claim what is your own. Every inch of earth, all the span of heaven, fields and skies and stars and seas, all continents and forests, all nebulae and galaxies, and all creatures and peoples, all principalities and governments, all of time and history, all wonders and mysteries, all loves, all hearts, all lives, all this is yours. Now let your resurrection at last be worked through the fabric of creation, till every fiber, every atom, every particle in play is bathed in holy light, consecrated forever as your own, till every sorrow we've sustained is redeemed, restored, renamed, till ones we've loved and lost and grieved are joined to us again, till all the brokenness that breaks our world is by your word made whole.